My name is Thomas Clark, and welcome to the Takeoff Podcast, where myself and guests help equip you to bring the peace of God to the place you live, work, learn, and play, all for His glory. Every problem is a discipleship problem. Being a disciple of Christ does not guarantee that we will not have problems. It does, however, give us the tools to face the challenges of life that come our way. My worldview is that Christ transforms culture, and He does it through His followers. The goal of Takeoff is to equip you for movemental thinking when it comes to making disciples. Welcome to Season 3. In this season, we will cover power, authority, how to overcome outrage, and we will discuss the robust gospel. Okay, let's get into it. It is important to know how to overcome outrage because we're people, we deal with people. And if there's anyone, group who's going to potentially hurt us or upset us or cause us to become outraged or become outraged with us, it's going to be other people. We need to know how to overcome outrage so that we can be embedded and fully show up in the places we live, work, learn, and play in order to wisely use the power. And as we talked about in the previous episode, power is influence. We'll wisely use the power and influence that we've been given by God. I'm talking about followers of Christ now. The best way to overcome outrage is to never give in to it in the first place. But that is challenging sometimes. Truth be told, we determine the meaning and value of the words that we use and also the words that other people use against us. Because more times than not, outrage is going to come over something that's spoken. Yes, there are times when things are done to us, but many times it's the words that are said to us or not said to us that cause us to have outrage. Sometimes we and the people with whom we engage are what's called ethnocentric. Ethnocentrism is why we can jump to conclusions or engage with others based on our cultural assumptions. You can be an ethnocentric. By definition, ethnocentrism is the use of one's own culture to measure another's culture, putting one's own culture or ethno at the centrism of interpretation, and typically devaluing the other culture. So in other words, we look at what people do, what people say, and because it's not something we do or say, and we really don't understand why they do or say it, we look at it through the lens of our own culture, and we interpret it, and we make a value judgment about it based on what we do or say, and then oftentimes it can lead us to become enraged, outraged, or others become enraged or outraged with or toward us for that same reason. Instead of being ethnocentric or having ethnocentrism, it is better to be ethnographic. Ethnography is a rich description and analysis of a culture that includes the individual who's in that, visiting that culture or observing that culture. It includes that person's experience of being there. In other words, we engage with people and their culture based on our experience with them and not on our own cultural thoughts or interpretations about what they're doing or what they're saying. Ethnography, being ethnographic, helps us to determine the meaning and value of the words other people use, but it also serves as a guardrail for the words we use with them because we have a better understanding or appreciation of being around them of their culture and how their culture interprets or receives certain things. Then there's certain words we wouldn't say because we understand that if I say this, and it's called encoding. If I encode or say a certain thing a certain way, they're going to decode or decipher, understand it a certain way. And if that's not what I intend, then I intentionally look to encode it in a way that's more ethnographic. But then conversely, I understand because I'm being ethnographic, then should the person or group say something that culturally I realize they're not trying to offend me, they're not trying to upset me, then I don't become offended or upset, because ethnographically I realize that perhaps they just didn't encode it in a way that would prohibit me or my primary culture from being offended by it. Let me make it real clear. That's why if someone calls you out of your name, you alone determine if those words have any value, because you can look at it ethnographically and realize that that's not who I am. Perhaps culturally, from where they come from, this is what they say. Even if they're cussing you out, that's not my name. That's not who I am. And one of the things I like to say oftentimes when I have these kind of talks with people, if it's not your name, why are you responding? Let me give you a quick example. My name is Thomas, but if someone called me Bob, and I'm sitting there and they're sitting next to me and they're saying Bob, well, because it's not my name, first of all, I wouldn't respond, because I wouldn't think they were talking to me. But then when I realized they're talking to me, and I looked at them and I said, oh, my name is Thomas, then they either A, they would say, oh, I'm sorry, or they say B, no, I want to call you Bob. Now, again, I have the opportunity to diffuse it by saying, no, it's not my name, and no longer respond to that, or not become offended because they called me a name that is not the one I was given at birth. And since it's not my name and I did not respond, then when I do respond, I probably should not be upset about it. And it's the same thing when people use words, expletive deleteds, or other things and say things about us. Well, that's not who you are. Then why are you upset about it? And if it is who you are, which you probably not, but if it is who you are, then why are you upset to tell them the truth? Either way, again, when we look at it ethnographically, we realize that I get to determine the meaning and value of these words. And if these words don't have any value to me culturally, then it doesn't matter what value they have to you, because I don't have to respond or be upset about it. But let me take it a step further. If a person is not in your group or community, and now we're talking about being a collective versus being an individualistic society, still talking about outrage, but I want to explain something. If a person is not in your group or your community, now for followers of Christ under the same Heavenly Father, then their words don't matter either. Now, I didn't say they don't matter. They do matter. They matter to God. They should matter to us. But the words they say don't matter because they have a different Father. Followers of Christ have a mutual obligation and accountability within biblical community to listen to one another, to hear what we're saying to and about one another, and to see or determine, is there any validity to what someone has said? Perhaps there's a blind spot that I didn't see, you didn't see, we didn't see in ourselves. And so someone says something to us, says something about us, and we're obligated to listen because we have to be accountable. But then mutual accountability and obligation goes a step further, because if we notice something within ourselves, then the people with whom we are in community, we should go to them and say, hey, I've noticed this about myself, and can you help me with this? Because it's all about getting better. So yes, we listen to people with whom we are biblical community under the same Father, because in truth, they can never, ever offend us. Let me read what Jesus says in Matthew chapter 18, starting at verse 15. He said, if your fellow believer sins against you, go and tell him or her in private what they did wrong, because it's not everyone's business. Because again, the whole goal is to restore relationships. Again, avoid outrage, restore relationships. You tell them in private, not after you tell everyone else. Now, if you put it on social media, tell them in private. If the person listens to you, you've helped that person to be your brother or sister again, because the goal is restoration. Verse 16, but if they refuse to listen, you take him again and go with one or two other people with you. Now, here's the thing. These are praying individuals in community. Not just two people you know, not just family members who may not be following Christ. No, these are people who are praying, who also want restoration, reconciliation. And you get them. He goes on to say, because every case may be proved by 2 or 3 witnesses. But then verse 17, if they refuse to listen when you bring the witnesses, you tell the church. Then you bring it publicly, because you've tried to restore the relationship. And if they refuse to listen to the church, then you treat them, here it is, like a person who does not believe God, or like a tax collector or a sinner, a person who's not in the family.
Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Thank you so much for coming by the podcast page. I really appreciate it. Hopefully the information that is shared has and will be able to benefit you and also the people you know. Listen, if it has been, or you believe it will benefit you, I'm asking you to do me 2 favors. First of all, please follow. Yeah, click follow. That way, every time a new episode is released, you will be alerted and you can stay current on everything that we're talking about. But additionally, I'm going to ask that you consider supporting. Your financial support goes a long way to help me help others and the work that we're doing in creating disciple-making movements. For your monthly or yearly support, not only will you receive access to episodes before everyone else does, but you also will, on a monthly basis, have a live Q&A with me, where I will be able to answer questions based on the episodes and questions you may have from what's been shared. There's only so much that myself and my guests can say during the podcast recordings, but during the live Q&A, we can take a deeper dive into questions you may have, ways that we've seen it play out and work out, and perhaps even some suggestions that you may have that we may be able to comment on to help you and help equip you to help bring the peace of God to the places you live, work, learn, and play. Thank you again for following and for supporting. I appreciate it. In other words, you cut them off. You stop communicating with them. You don't have to find an outrage. We don't have to get upset and fight and argue and everything else. No, we cut them off, he says, because the goal is restoration. If someone ultimately does not want to restore, particularly when now, after we've tried one-on-one and we've brought 2 or 3 praying followers of Christ, and now we brought them and they didn't listen to us or them, and now we've brought the church with us, talking about the movement, the body of Christ, the church. The church, by definition for us, is the presence of Jesus and the people of Jesus everywhere all the time. We brought them to the collective group that has the presence of Jesus in them operating, and they don't want to hear them. Well, that's a person who's going to bring discord. That's a person who's going to keep up trouble. That's a person who, from their own ethnocentric perspective, is going to hold on to problems and outrage. And Jesus says, then you treat them like somebody that's not a part of your family. It's not that you don't love them, but they will cause too much strife. So we reconcile with those in our collective society because we have the same Father. And so using that as the backdrop and understanding that helps us when outrage comes. Do we have the same Father, first of all? If we do, let me not fly into a fit. Let me be ethnographic and let me seek to restore. If we don't have the same Father, we aren't following the same Father, then I can invite you into the family. But ultimately, I shouldn't fall out and allow outrage to fester or to develop or to boil over, because the goal is restoration, and you're not trying to restore. They're not trying to restore. Remember, we determine the meaning and value of the words that we use. I repeat, that's why if someone calls you out of your name, you alone determine if those words have any value. You don't have to let them have value to you. So I want to encourage us, first of all, take back the power of the words we speak and stop giving authority to made up words that do not define who you've been called by God. Take back the power of what you say. Your words mean something. They do. So don't just throw words out there ethnocentrically that are meant to hurt or to cause confusion or to cause division. Don't do that. I encourage you not to do that, at least. Instead, let the words we say mean something. Remember, we encode so they can decode. So use words that we know mean something to them that's going to help bring restoration. But then also don't give authority to made up words. What's a made up word? A made up word is a word that doesn't have any value to you. It can be a real word ethnocentrically, but because it doesn't have any value to you, then it's a made up word that can't hurt or impact you. So the question is, again, what about those who are not in biblical community with us? Well, let's go and deal with that. What we do with them is, I alluded to it a moment ago, but let's unpack this. We invite them into the privileges of biblical community through what's called biblical hospitality. By definition, hospitality in the Bible is the love of strangers. We love them and we invite them into that love where under the Father, where they can have that mutual accountability and obligation. Hebrews 13:1. The Lord says to the author of the book of Hebrews, keep on loving each other as brothers and sisters. Remember, there it is, brothers and sisters, because we got the same daddy. Then verse 2, he says, remember to welcome strangers, because some have done this, who have done this, have welcomed angels without knowing it. So we love each other's brothers and sisters, regardless of what happens, and we issue that same love to strangers so they can ultimately become a part of the family also. And we use this to help us engage all peoples. Yes, peoples with an S, because we're talking about people groups, peoples. Those with whom we are in biblical community and those we invite into the biblical community. But what about those who do not want to be in biblical community? First of all, we should live a life that represents Christ at all times so that there is no credible accusations against and about us, that they can't say anything any credible. They can say what they want to say, but it shouldn't be credible. But then number two, if they're not interested in biblical community, we're not obligated to listen to their accusations or attacks. Listen again in Matthew 18 to the words of Jesus. Matthew 18 verse 17. If that person refuses to listen when you bring those witnesses, you tell it to the church. If they refuse to listen to the church, then treat that person like one who does not believe in God or like a tax collector. We don't have to continue to deal with them. We don't have to be outraged and go into a fit and have high blood pressure or want to argue and fight or fuss. No, we essentially, we're rejecting them because they've rejected to have the unity and the love of biblical community. So actually they reject it, and we're saying, no, we're going to give you what you want. You don't want this, then we're not going to deal with you like that. But then thirdly, if you've offered peace and that peace is rejected, which you would have done by trying to restore a relationship or invite them into biblical community, then you move on if they reject it. Luke chapter 10, verse 5, Jesus says, before you go into a house, say, peace be with this house. If peace-loving people live there, your blessing of peace will stay with them. But if not, then your blessing will come back to you. Skip down to verse 10 of Luke chapter 10. But if you go into a town and the people don't welcome you, Then go into the streets and say, even the dirt from your town that sticks to our feet, we wipe off against you. But remember remember the kingdom of God is near. In other words, you still let them know they can come to Christ, but I'm not going to stay here and continue to try to engage with you if you are rejecting. I've tried to be ethnographic. I've tried to be there with you. Jesus says, stay there with them. Be ethnographic. Be embedded with them. But if they don't want it, then you know what? You move on. You move on. You move on. If someone who does not follow the Lord is not trying to be at peace with you, then be sure you've given them an opportunity to come into his family. But if they reject you and say no, again, you move on. Please do not try to convince them that you're right. And that's all you're doing after a while, trying to convince them that you're right. That's why you give them a chance and you move on. Same thing. If someone does not want to reconcile, all they want is outrage. Even if they say they have the same father. I'm not saying they say like they're not saved. Only God knows those who are his. But if they have the same father, but they don't want to reconcile, then you move on. Because after that, all you're trying to do is convince them that you're right. Now, for those who don't follow Christ, they have a different father. So respect it and pray that one day they will want to follow Christ. But do not allow what they say or do to cause you to act out of character. We shouldn't do that. We have, you all, as followers of Christ, new culture. We come into new creation. It's not just that we're new. We come into new creation. And that helps you all develop. We have to help develop the new culture. And it will not happen, though, if we respond in ways that have become the norm in the current culture. In other words, whatever the prevailing culture is, if we respond like the prevailing culture responds, we will never be able to truly create new culture, transform the current culture to what it needs to be. So let's talk about the role of culture in all of this. As we talk about not having outrage, let's talk about culture for a second. What was God's first gift to humanity after creation? It was the gift of culture. Culture, you all, is what we make of the world. Genesis chapter 1, verse 26. Then God said, let us make human beings in our image and likeness, and let them rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, over the tame animals, over all the earth, and over all the small crawling animals on the earth. God blessed them and said, have many children and grow in number, fill the earth and be its master. Rule over the fish in the sea, over the birds in the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. Notice what I just read, you all. That man was given the gift of culture to make something of this world that God created. Now notice also we were given the ability to create culture using language. Language helps create culture. Now, we talked about it. Now, let words upset you to the point that you act out of character or keep you stuck in the current prevailing culture. But instead, use our words and code them in a way to create new culture. Watch this, ethnographically. Genesis chapter 2, verse 19, from the ground God formed every wild animal and every bird in the sky, and he brought them to the man so the man could name them. Whatever the man called each living thing, that became his name. Using language to create culture. The man gave names to all the tame animals, to the birds in the sky, to all the wild animals, but Adam did not find a helper that was right for him. I'm encouraging us all, you all, to take back the power of the words we speak and stop giving authority to made up words that don't define what you've been called by God and who you've been called by God. No, he said what we are. He said who we are. And the words we speak have authority, have power, and the words other people speak can have it, but only if it is aligned with what the Lord has said. If not, then don't give power to it. And this helps to diffuse, eliminate, or prevent outrage. What God wanted man to do, you all, when he created us, he wanted man to be creators also. Not capital C creators, but lowercase c creators, just that he created. Even though we could not do what he had done, he still wanted us to be creative. The earth In Genesis 1:31, after God made everything, inclusive human beings, he looked and said it's very good. Well, the earth was only good until God was able to look and see a reflection of himself, the imago Dei, image of God, image bearers of God, imago, I-M-A-G-O, next word capital D-E-I, deity, the imago Dei, image bearers of God. And when God looked and saw a reflection of himself, it became very good. But then God allowed Adam, humanity, to create, which then developed new culture. Genesis 1:26 again, God said, let us make human beings in image and likeness. Let them rule over the fish in the sea, the birds in the sky, over the tame animals, over all the earth, over every small crawling animal, and over all the small crawling animals on the earth. God gave humanity the mandate or the official order to make something out of what he created. To be clear, everything that was made by the Father through Jesus, the Christ, so Jesus, the anointed one. John chapter 1, verse 3 says, all things were made by him, and nothing was made without him, talking about Christ. In the beginning, before time it was created, you all, or established, there was nothing, and there was God. Then out of nothing, God created everything. This shows us that the cosmos, inclusive of humanity, was not necessary for God to be who he is. He was God without us and without everything else. Yet God created and then said he would give the imago Dei, his image bearers, the authority to create culture. I'm still talking about outrage. I'm talking about how we have to do to create culture, and culture for better and not for worse. Outrage is for worse. Reconciliation, restoration is for better. Andy Crouch in his book Culture Making explained that the first chapter of Genesis records a series of divisions. He says each of which makes the world more amenable for the flourishing of creativity. He goes on to write in that book that creativity requires cosmos. It requires an ordered environment. I want you to notice, you all, when you read Genesis chapter 1, the order God used in creation and how each part of creation was dependent on that which came before it. The first thing we see is sound. Then we see movement. Then we see separation. Then we see order. Then we see habitation. And then we see humanity. What God did, you all, is he put humanity into an order creation that included habitation so that we, humanity, could flourish. Each subsequent part of creation was placed into an existing culture, and then it transformed the existing culture into something new, which allows something new to come that allowed the new culture to continue to be transformed into something new. So sound existed, then movement came. Was movement came built on sound, separation could come. Without movement, there's no separation. Without separation, there's no order. But because you have separation, you can get order. Because of order, you can have habitation. Again, without order, there's no habitation. Without habitation, there's no humanity. Because God would not have put humanity into the chaos that existed before there was sound, movement, separation, order, and habitation. So God, again, put humanity into this ordered creation that included habitation so that we could flourish. Again, each subsequent part was placed into existing culture and then transformed it into something new. Now, to help us understand this, Crouch wrote in his book, so in a way, the Creator's greatest gift to his creation is the gift of structure, which provides freedom. And I like to say it like this: God gave us freedom within the framework so that we can be creator and ruler on his earth. He was the first gardener, the first culture maker. And as such, he gave culture to humanity as a gift. What is culture then? Culture is our attempt to make something else out of what's been given to us. And whether we realize it or not, whether we intend to do it or not, we're always creating by either treasuring or trashing the world around us. Either we're going to a fit of outrage or we're engaging in order for there to be reconciliation and restoration, for there to be unity and love. What are we doing? Are we allowing outrage to cause us to treasure? And then it only festers and create more and more of a culture of outrage and distrust. This is so important. you all, that we grasp this, because as the Imago Dei, as the image bearers of God, we're always creators in every area of life, and we must be good creators in order to represent the triune God correctly in the place we live, work, learn, and play. Well, this happens through what's called the doctrine of creation. As we learn to be good creatures in relation to the Creator, we also can become good creators in the way He allows us to create. The doctrine of creation is about our work and our leisure, our souls and our bodies. As we become experienced in this doctrine, we'll find ourselves coming back and be reoriented, re-engaged ethnographically into life. This doctrine helps us fight injustice because we want to see and we want to do good in this world, not be outraged and fighting and feuding. And because we understand, because language creates culture, we can put into motion words, but also ideas and plans that other people can use and improve on to make a difference. Instead of us taking and being upset and feuding and fussing and fighting, no, things can be improved. This doctrine of creation helps us to be generous because we realize our gracious generosity can partner with others to help make a difference. Remember the language. Our language is fruitful, and we have the ability to encode words that already exist to create sentences that may not have existed and may never have existed had we never put them together. That's creating. But when we do this, we really should do it to bring peace, shalom, not pain. So instead of us being upset and going into an outrage and cursing or cussing people out and calling them out of their name, or becoming upset when they create new phrases and words using what already exists to cuss us out or call us out of our name, and then we go into an outrage there. No, we can instead use our words to bring peace. And because we realize that their words have been encoded in a way that means something to them, they don't have to mean anything to us. And so we can refuse to decode them. I refuse to accept or receive that. And so no pain. It doesn't mean we don't like it. It doesn't mean we want them to do this, but what it does mean though is that they don't have to hurt us. They don't have to hurt us, you all. Culture making authority is seen as we are ethnographic and engaged people with whom we are in biblical community, and those we are invited into this community through biblical hospitality. I do hope and pray that, as I've shared through this podcast, that you see ways to overcome outrage. I believe this information can help stop or even prevent some of these social media beefs. It can stop it from festering. It can prevent it from even happening. What I just shared can help bring restoration, reconciliation to relationships. What I just shared can help this nation and others, and even nation to nation. But it starts with the followers of Christ. It starts with the followers of Christ. With us using and living this out with those with whom we are in biblical community, extended to those who may not be in community with us through hospitality, but then understanding that if they don't want it, if they don't receive it, if they refuse to decode what we're saying in ways that mean something to them, and we know we've tried, we move on. But as Jesus said, we still are clear. The kingdom is coming. You can still come to him. But I got to move on to help others and to help bring peace to others. I want to thank you for listening. I encourage you to consider supporting the work that we're doing to help equip people to bring the peace of God in the place they live, work, learn, and play by playing the gospel. As the gospel is planted, disciples rise. As the disciples rise, the church organically emerges. I began this podcast with the intent of helping equip people to have authentic relationships that will help bring the peace of God to where they live, work, learn, and play, all for His glory. And your generosity helps me do that, as well as bring on guests who can assist in both adding to your toolkit and sharpening the tools you may already have. Now, I want you to stay tuned to learn some immediate next steps you can take as a result of engaging with this podcast today. Thank you so much. I want to challenge you to create and live out an I will statement. An I will statement is just that, a statement that says it begins with I will, and you fill in the blank. But the blank is going to be filled in based on what God has told you to start or stop doing as a result of what's been shared through this podcast. But then also share who you're going to speak with or share the I will statement with to help hold you accountable. There's someone you know, just as God spoke to you through our sharing, there's someone else that may have come to mind. You say, you know what, I want to share this with them, with him or her. Specific people, not just everyone. You can't share with everyone, you don't know everyone. But who specifically can you share this with to help you be accountable to keep your word, and then also help them to walk it out and live it out as well. Thank you so much. And then I encourage you to drop a chat. Send us a note. I want to just see how you're engaging with this information, how it's helped you, or even put your I will statement in. I would love to read it and communicate with you. Thank you again.